Hey everyone, tonight we will drift back to the marble halls of ancient Rome, where torchlight reflects on gilded ceilings, and the echo of sandals hides secrets darker than any battlefield. You are not only stepping into the capital of the empire, but also walking straight into the private world of Commodus, the one called the son of a great philosopher, yet who turned the palace into a nightmare festival. The whispered stories behind those gilded doors were enough to make even a seasoned senator choke on his wine. And trust me, if you happened to be summoned into his chamber, you probably would not survive long enough to write a letter home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while listening, leave a comment to let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you live. I truly love seeing how our community of night owls stretches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are sitting there, in the gentle darkness, hearing the soft whir of the fan, as I guide you along the marble halls of ancient Rome, where Emperor Commodus reigned. You can almost imagine the faint scent of incense lingering from sacred rituals, mingling with the aroma of wine still hanging in the air after an endless banquet. Here, supreme power lay in the hands of a young man barely in his 20s, the son of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. It sounds promising, but in truth, it is like putting your hopes in the wealthy son who swears to take over the family coffee shop, only to one day open your eyes and find he has turned it into a gigantic cosplay stage. The official historical event was this. In the year 180 after Christ, Marcus Aurelius died, and his son Lucius Aurelius Commodus ascended the throne at only 19 years old. This was the turning point that the historian Edward Gibbon would later call the beginning of the decline of Rome. One would think the empire would continue with the philosophical light of the father, but no. From here, you will witness the spectacle of a spoiled child holding boundless power in his hands. A strange detail few people know. Very early on, rumors spread in the court that Commodus was not the biological son of Marcus Aurelius, but the result of a secret affair between his mother Faustina and a gladiator. At first, the gossip was nothing more than whispers in the corridor, but it accidentally foretold Commodus's lifelong obsession with the arena, where he would don a lion's skin and swing a club like a reborn Hercules. Think about it, how ironic. People say you are the child of a gladiator, and instead of denying it, you spend your entire life living exactly as the rumor claimed. Historians still debate. Did Marcus Aurelius truly believe his son had the qualities to lead? Or was he simply bound by the notion of hereditary succession? Some argue that Marcus placed too much faith in education and philosophy, believing that if Commodus had the finest teachers, the boy would become a wise ruler. But others suggest Marcus had no other choice. If he did not hand the throne to his son, Rome would fall into a spiral of power struggles. You see, even the greatest kings can make decisions whose consequences leave the world shaking its head. Picture this. While the father Marcus once sat in a military tent amid the snows of the Danube writing the Meditations, Commodus sat in a gilded palace, deciding whether today he would become Hercules, Apollo, or Jupiter when he entered his bedroom. If Instagram had existed back then, his feed would probably have been full of selfies captioned, "Feeling divine today." A joke, of course, but he truly turned the entire court into a stage for his divine fantasies. Do you hear the noise of the arena echoing? The roar of the crowd, the smell of sweat, the hot dust, the clang of sword against shield. But do not mistake this for the thrilling battles you see in films. Commodus preferred to face animals already wounded, or opponents weakened by drugs. And after he triumphed, the Senate had to shout praises in unison that sounded like an absurd PR script. Imagine your boss forcing the whole company to chant, "You are the best, you always win." Every time he accomplished something trivial, you would probably want to hand in your resignation the very next day. Another strange fact. Commodus commissioned countless busts of himself in the guise of Hercules, holding a club, draped in a lion's skin. Some even included a starfish and a golden apple, to symbolize that he embodied the full power of the gods. These statues were not only displays of vanity, but also reminders to the Roman people that from now on, the emperor was not merely mortal, but a living god. Historians also argue about the true extent of Commodus's madness. Some claim that ancient writers like Cassius Dio or Herodian exaggerated to slander him. Yet evidence from coins, inscriptions, and graffiti shows he genuinely wanted to rename Rome as Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana, in translation, the city of Commodus. Does that sound to you like the extreme rebrand of some modern CEO? We are no longer called Rome. From today, everything will be Commodus City. In that atmosphere, you can sense the suffocation of the aristocracy. Senators, once accustomed to wielding authority, were now forced into the role of unwilling spectators in his delusional plays. Their wives, their daughters, were dragged into the palace under vague pretexts, never able to recount exactly what happened behind closed doors. Imagine sitting on a cold marble bench, clapping on cue, even though inside you wanted nothing more than to run outside. Hearing this, you might think that sometimes working in a modern office, stuck in endless meetings, is actually the easier fate. Just a joke, but the consequences were truly disastrous. When the money in the imperial treasury, instead of paying soldiers, flowed into lavish banquets, when the throne became nothing more than a prop for divine roleplay, Rome did not only lose wealth, they lost faith in their government. Merchants avoided the city, soldiers lost morale, and enemies along the borders began to watch closely. All because an emperor believed himself to be an upgraded version of Hercules. And you see, this story has everything to make you both shiver and laugh. A clearly recorded historical event, Commodus, ascending the throne in the year 180. A strange detail, the rumor that he was the child of a gladiator, and an academic debate still unresolved whether ancient historians exaggerated to slander him or whether he truly turned Rome into a vaudeville stage. You are lying there, listening to the slow narration, noticing that the distance between the distant past and the present is not so great. Today, too, you see powerful figures who love to create illusions that make the whole world applaud. But like the story of Commodus, sooner or later, the audience grows tired and the stage collapses. Do you hear the footsteps echoing across the marble floor? They are slow, with a hint of overconfidence, and then the great doors close, shutting you off from the outside world. Inside the palace, Commodus begins to turn everything into entertainment. He does not care for reports or dispatches from the borders. What he wants is to hear himself called by divine titles. You can picture him in a lion skin cloak, holding a wooden club, standing before a polished bronze mirror, admiring himself and laughing aloud. If TikTok had existed back then, surely Commodus would have posted a clip captioned, "Point of view, I am Hercules reborn," with epic background music. The official historical fact you must remember: Commodus did not only want to be emperor, he wanted to be worshipped as a god. Busts of him in the guise of Hercules sprang up everywhere, from squares to temples. He even had coins struck with his image as Hercules Romanus, along with boastful inscriptions. Archaeological evidence today still confirms this, proving it was not mere exaggeration from historians. A little-known detail: Commodus once declared he would rename every month of the year into variations of his own name. January would become Commodus Victorious, February, Commodus Invincible, and so on. Imagine trying to schedule a meeting with your boss. In that era, it would be chaos. "We'll meet on the 15th day of Commodus the Great." Fortunately, the plan did not last long, but it was enough to show he wanted to erase even the concept of time so that only his mark remained. Historians still argue, was Commodus's claim of being the reincarnation of Hercules merely political theatre to win over the masses? Or did he truly believe in the illusion? Some suggest it was a populist tactic after all. Ordinary Romans adored gladiators and mythic heroes, but much evidence shows he was genuinely obsessed. From his costumes to his performances, to the self-worship rituals he forced others to attend. You see, when a person in power begins to believe in the very fantasies they invented, it becomes a red signal for the downfall of an entire civilization. You can hear the noise from the Colosseum, the blare of horns, the roar of the crowd, the pounding steps of wild beasts. But do not be fooled, the matches under Commodus were nothing but farce. He liked to face lions already wounded, or gladiators drugged into staggering weakness, and then he would stand tall to receive the compulsory applause. The Senate was forced to attend, their mouths shouting hollow praises. Think of it, it was no different from a CEO making his employees clap every time he typed in the right computer password. Another strange detail. Commodus often held all-night banquets, turning the palace into what many described as the empire's gigantic brothel. Slaves, nobles, even the Vestal virgins were rumored to have been dragged into bizarre role-playing games. It is difficult to know for certain, since many sources avoid the details, but that very silence makes the tale even more chilling. Historians still debate the reliability of these accounts. Some say they were exaggerations by senators who despised Commodus. But others argue that when too many independent sources record the same kinds of behavior, there must have been a frightening core of truth. Picture it. Candlelight flickering across the faces of senators, sitting helpless, their wives and daughters trembling at their side, while the young emperor laughed arrogantly, demanding that everyone call him Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. In that moment, Rome was no longer Rome, but a giant stage for the delusions of one man. Do you see what makes this story both ridiculous and tragic? It shows that even a great civilization can be turned upside down by a single, unbalanced individual. An emperor who turned the palace into a stage, the battlefield into a circus, and all of history into a long-running joke. And yes, if you had been there, you might not have survived, not at least in spirit. Close your eyes and imagine the clinking of coins falling onto the marble floor of the Roman treasury. But instead of paying the soldiers guarding the borders or building roads and bridges, the money was thrown by Commodus into banquets lasting many days. The menu needs no embellishment. Grapes imported from Egypt, spices from India, silks from China, and exotic animals brought in only to be displayed at feasts before becoming entertainment. You can almost smell the sweet richness of honey mingled with the aroma of roasting meat, the smoke so thick you would have to cover your face not to choke. The official historical record, documents from this period, clearly state that the Roman treasury, carefully built over generations, was quickly drained under Commodus. He not only spent on feasts, but sold important offices in the government. Pay the right price, and you could become governor or general, regardless of ability. This was the seed of chaos to come, when the incompetent but wealthy rose to power. A little-known detail. Records mention that Commodus once staged a banquet reenacting mythological tales, in which the guests had to play Greek and Roman gods, following a script of his invention. Those who failed to perform well met a grim fate. It was like a reality show in the ancient world, but instead of being eliminated from the program, the player could be eliminated from life itself. Imagine being at a dinner where one wrong line could cost you your life. Surely no one would dare speak at all. Historians still debate. Were the descriptions of luxury and brutality in Commodus's palace exaggerated to serve the political aims of the senatorial class? Some argue yes, since that class despised him. But today, archaeological evidence, such as coins debased in quality, or remains showing the palace refitted into theatres and playgrounds, does confirm at least part of those ghastly accounts. Place yourself in the shoes of Roman soldiers on the frontier. They were freezing on the Danube, facing ferocious Germanic tribes, while the only news from the capital was that the emperor was parading in a lion's skin, boasting of arena victories. How do you think their morale stood? No wonder the army began to lose faith, while enemies seized the opportunity to strike. Sounds a bit like today, when workers toil hard in the field, while the boss is busy live-streaming his luxurious life. Another strange scene. Commodus often wandered the city at night, trailed by gladiators and henchmen. He would disguise himself, suddenly attack passers-by, even drag them back to the palace for sport. Imagine you are strolling peacefully, when suddenly you encounter the emperor cosplaying Hercules with his gang that was the Roman nightmare come alive. And historians have not stopped debating one crucial question. Was Commodus simply a deranged individual? Or was it the imperial system itself placing absolute power in one man that was the deeper cause? Some say that anyone on the throne under such conditions would easily become a monster. But others argue no. Commodus was uniquely unstable and pushed everything to the extreme. You see, in just a short passage we already tasted all. Wasted wealth, an army demoralized, citizens living in fear. Rome, once an awe-inspiring empire, had become a chaotic stage where everything revolved around one man convinced he was Hercules reborn. And perhaps you see it too. There are some parties you should decline even if invited with an excuse like, Sorry, I have to wash my toga. I'll take a deep breath and sense the solemn atmosphere of the ancient Roman temples. Thick incense smoke rising, chants echoing, priests in long white robes standing in rows. These places were meant to be sacred, connecting humanity to the gods. But when Commodus entered, the air shifted. The rituals became a bizarre performance, where he himself was the star. The official historical fact: Commodus held the title of Pontifex Maximus, the supreme high priest of Rome, responsible for maintaining religious tradition. Instead of preserving it, he turned the rites into personal entertainment. Many festivals were altered to glorify him, and even ceremonies of marriage and fertility were re-choreographed in ways that shocked society. A little-known detail: Commodus once renamed the very capital of Rome as Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He also renamed the legions, and even altered religious rites. It is said that during one ceremony, priests were required to call him the living god, and to pray at his feet as if before the statue of Jupiter. Imagine if today a politician forced everyone to sing karaoke praising him at a school inauguration. You would probably run for the door immediately. Historians still debate: was Commodus's transformation of religion into spectacle driven by genuine delusion, or was it simply a way to consolidate power? Some scholars believe he truly thought himself the embodiment of Hercules, so his blending of the divine and the ordinary was sincere. Others argue it was pure political theatre, forcing citizens and nobles alike to bow beneath a new ritual, whether they believed or not. Do you hear the hurried footsteps of the priests? Some mumbling prayers, others glancing nervously aside. Yet none dared resist, for before them stood an emperor with blazing eyes and an erratic temper. A nod from him could turn someone into a favored man, but a single frown was enough to erase an entire family from Rome. Another strange detail: Commodus loved to invert the social order during ceremonies. He forced powerful senators to kneel, while slaves or gladiators were made to stand higher. It was both a power game and his way of proving that every hierarchy, every Roman tradition, meant nothing unless he permitted it. Put plainly, he wanted all to understand that from now on, gods, laws, and customs stood beneath the whim of one man. Does it sound familiar? Even today, you can see places where rituals meant to unite communities are twisted into tools of personal image. The difference is that instead of carving their names on city gates or renaming months, modern figures prefer skyscrapers or football stadiums bearing their names. You can almost feel the weariness in Roman society at that time. People lost trust in their traditional religion, for solemn ceremonies had been turned into farce. They began to seek other paths, mystery cults, new faiths. This was the very era when secret cults like that of Mithras spread widely among soldiers, while Christianity, still illegal, gained followers with its promise of justice in another world. Historians still debate: did the corruption of rituals under Commodus help accelerate the rise of Christianity? Some say it was inevitable. When the old order is disgraced, people turn to the new. Others argue the movement already had its own momentum, and Commodus merely hastened what was bound to come. You see, in the hazy incense smoke of the temple, you can smell not only resin but also the anxiety of a society losing its bearings. Religion, once the spiritual anchor of the Romans, had become nothing more than a veil for the emperor's excesses. And when faith falters, the very foundation of civilization begins to tremble. Picture a Roman noble family in the evening. The oil lamp flickers, children sit around the table, and the parents whisper, "Do not draw attention. Do not let anyone know you are beautiful or clever." Instead of boasting proudly of their children, many families tried to hide them, even dull their appearance to avoid the emperor's gaze. It sounds unbelievable, but under Commodus, the innocence of childhood became a danger. The official historical fact: many records state that Commodus often took the children of powerful families as hostages to guarantee the loyalty of their parents. This was a familiar political tradition in Rome, but in his hands it became twisted. Children were not only tokens of assurance, but were also dragged into debauchery and obsessive control. A little-known detail: some families deliberately made their children look unattractive. They cut their hair strangely, smeared dirt on their skin, even dressed them in rags, anything to lessen the chance of drawing Commodus's attention. It was like a forced Halloween costume. But for them, it was the only way to protect their children. Think about it when parents must invent ugly fashion to keep their children safe. How warped must society have become? Historians still debate. Was the extent of Commodus's mistreatment of children exaggerated by hostile sources, or did he truly overstep every limit, even by ancient standards? Some suggest that many of these tales were darkened to illustrate Rome's decline. But others argue that when too many sources, from Cassius Dio to Herodian, speak of the fear gripping Roman families, there must be a core of truth. You hear your heartbeat quicken as you imagine it. In that palace, children who should have been playing in the gardens instead trembled under candlelight, not understanding why they had been summoned. Innocence was stolen, and childhood memories turned into psychological scars that followed them for life. This was not only a personal tragedy, but a crack spreading through an entire civilization. Another strange detail. Some records say that certain families even sent their children away to distant provinces, or pretended they were sickly so they would not be chosen. To you, it may sound like a hiding game, but in truth it was daily, suffocating fear. As you sink into this slow rhythm of narration, you realize it was not only blood and war that weakened Rome. It was the loss of safety within the family, the overturning of basic values where children were no longer protected that broke society's trust. And when trust collapses, an empire, no matter how vast, begins to crumble. Perhaps you also see a modern echo. When a society cannot guarantee safety even for its children, collapse is only a matter of time. Today, we take the protection of children as a given, but in the story of Commodus, you see that this given was once a rare luxury for many Romans. Listen closely, the fan in your room still turns steadily, while I lead you deeper into the Roman palace where, under Commodus, every paving stone, every blare of a war trumpet was turned into a prop for one man's madness. Imagine this. When Marcus Aurelius was alive, the Roman army was guided by a philosopher, emperor, who lay cold at night in a Danube tent to write the Meditations. Yet just one generation later, his successor brought the elite praetorians into the palace, forcing them to play beasts in his twisted performances. Soldiers once accustomed to brandishing swords on battlefields now had to crawl on all fours, growling like lions, while the emperor donned a lion's skin, swung his club, and laughed with delight. Can you picture it? A force that once made the world tremble, now humiliated in the very heart of the capital. That scene was not only humiliating, it shattered the very foundation of Rome's strength. Commodus and his courtier Cleander even auctioned off the empire's highest offices. Whoever had money could become a governor, even a general, regardless of whether he could tell left from right in a battle formation. The iron discipline that had built the legend of the Roman legions was replaced by the crude farce of buying and selling power. Do you hear the war trumpet sounding? It no longer rang out sharp and commanding, but warped, like the military machine itself had lost its rhythm. And historians still debate. Had the rot already been festering long before? Or was Commodus truly the spark that set everything ablaze? Some say he was merely the last drop in the overflowing cup, but many insist that it was his madness and the selling of offices that caused the army's collapse to come so swiftly. Breathe in the smell of the markets of Rome at that time. No longer bustling as before, merchants began to withdraw. They knew the imperial treasury meant for soldiers' wages was being drained for daily banquets filled with Egyptian grapes, Indian spices, Chinese silk, and exotic animals brought only to amuse. Some sources say Commodus even reduced the silver content in the denarius, causing its value to plummet. People called it the Commodus coin, a coin that at the market bought you little more than the scornful look of the seller. A joke in words, but the suffering was real. An empire once thriving on trade now began to tremble. Meanwhile, the young emperor not only squandered wealth, but enjoyed disguising himself at night, roaming the streets with gladiators at his side. Some people were attacked without warning, some dragged straight back to the palace. Citizens lived in constant fear. Many wealthy families sent their children to distant provinces, even smeared dirt on their faces or cut their hair into ugly shapes to avoid catching the emperor's eye. It sounds like a desperate Halloween costume, but it was a survival strategy in earnest. And scholars still argue to this day, was Commodus's thuggish knight wandering real, or just a story crafted by senatorial hatred? Whether true or not, the very fact that people believed it showed that Rome had lost all faith in its ruler. In the temples, once the sacred heart of Rome, Commodus turned everything into his stage. As Pontifex Maximus, he was meant to preserve tradition, but instead he forced priests to call him the living god. He renamed the city of Rome itself as Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana, and even renamed the months into variations of his own name. Imagine trying to schedule a meeting with your boss in the month of Commodus Invincible, only to reschedule it for the month of Commodus the Great. You would no longer know which year you were living in. And the scholarly debate remains. Did Commodus truly believe himself to be Hercules reborn? Or was it all a ploy to manipulate the masses? Archaeological evidence, from busts to coins, shows that his belief was not only real, but obsessive. But when he turned sacred rituals into theatre, the people lost faith. They sought out new beliefs. Mystery cults like Mithras spread widely among the soldiers. Christianity, though still forbidden, quietly attracted followers with its promise of justice in another world. Many scholars argue that the chaos in traditional faiths opened the way for the rise of new religions. Some believe that growth was inevitable, but others hold that without Commodus, its spread would not have been so swift. You can feel the stifling atmosphere of Rome at that time. Citizens whispered to each other, "Do not let your children out at night, the emperor may be roaming." Merchants hid their goods, families hid their children, and soldiers hid their loyalty. From households to the army, from marketplaces to temples, everything was dragged into the whirlpool of Commodus's madness. Yet that arrogance also planted the seeds of his end. The very courtiers who once flattered him turned against him. Marcia, his mistress, discovered her name on a list of executions. Latus, commander of the Praetorians, knew his position could be stripped away at any moment. Eclectus, the chamberlain, understood he would never retire in peace. Together, they plotted his death. At first they tried poison in his bath, but Commodus vomited it out. Finally, a wrestler named Narcissus was sent, and there, on the 31st of December, in the year 192, the self-proclaimed Hercules reborn died without trumpet or fanfare, strangled in his own bath. You can hear the water splashing, the thrashing, then silence. All of Rome exhaled in relief. The Senate immediately declared him an enemy of the people, ordered his name erased, his statues destroyed, every inscription cut away. Yet no matter how many bronzes were shattered, they could not erase the wound he had left in the heart of society. Rome had lost its confidence, its belief that it was the center of civilization. And perhaps you too feel the bitter irony. Commodus wanted immortality through glory, but the only eternity he achieved was infamy. You might smile faintly, knowing that even a mighty empire like Rome could tremble under the madness of a single man. And you might also shiver, realizing that civilization is not a permanent achievement, but a fragile construction. One man with too much power and too little conscience can make it collapse. That is the lesson echoing from the time of Commodus. Rome may have fallen from within, not because of enemies at the borders, but because of one man carrying both divine delusion and the emptiness of a lost soul. You turn slightly, letting the breeze of the fan brush your skin, as I guide you further into the shadow. Commodus left behind after his final breath in the bath. That death, quiet as it sounded, left behind a legacy as heavy as 1,000 stone tablets. Romans thought that once the monster was gone, the empire would flourish again. But in truth, the collapse he began continued, carving scars that lasted for centuries. On the very first day after Commodus's death, the Senate was ablaze with fury. They swiftly declared him hostis publicus, enemy of the people. His statues in the guise of Hercules were toppled, inscriptions bearing his name were chiseled away, and even the renamed months were immediately restored to their old forms. Imagine it like an empire-wide unfollow campaign, except instead of clicking a button, people smashed things with their own hands. Yet the relief was short-lived, for Rome soon plunged into a new spiral. In the year 193 after Christ, history remembers it as the Year of the Five Emperors. Picture it, within just 12 months, the throne changed hands 5 times. A seat already unsteady under Commodus now became a commodity for whoever could seize it. Even the Roman throne, once the untouchable symbol of power, was literally put up for sale. Records say the Praetorian Guard auctioned off the right to be emperor to the highest bidder. It sounds like a modern auction, except the item up for bid was an entire empire. This was the first legacy, the loss of sanctity in the throne. Since the time of Augustus, It had been wrapped in divine aura, a symbol of stability. But after Commodus, the throne was reduced to a chair of power purchasable with gold or brute force. You see, once trust is broken, nothing can restore the old reverence. Another legacy. The army became a political player. Once, legions served the state. But after witnessing the cowardice and delusions of Commodus, soldiers no longer cared for the man in Rome. Their loyalty shifted to the general who led them directly, the one who could pay wages on time and share spoils more generously. And when personal loyalty outweighed loyalty to the state, you can guess the outcome. The empire fell into chaos. Generals fought each other for the purple, and Rome entered a cycle of endless civil wars. Nor can we overlook the legacy of religion and belief. When Commodus turned rituals into farce, Roman faith wavered. At that very moment, Christianity and mystery cults flourished like seeds finding fertile ground. Disillusioned with the false, living God, people turned to the unseen God who promised justice in the life to come. Modern historians still debate. Did Commodus inadvertently help accelerate the Christianization of Rome? Some say it was mere coincidence, but others argue the spiritual emptiness he left behind opened the door to a new religious order. A little-known detail, after his death, rumors spread among the people that Commodus's ghost still lingered in the arena. They whispered that on moonlit nights, one could hear the swing of a club and the false cheers of a crowd echoing. Of course, it was only rumor, but it showed how deeply his memory had seeped into Roman imagination, taking on a ghostly shape. Modern scholars still argue fiercely. Was Commodus truly the turning point that dragged Rome from its golden empire into decline, or just a dark chapter in a long history? Some insist he was the true beginning of downfall when trust, economy, and the army were all broken. Others maintain that Rome was already too vast, too unwieldy, and Commodus merely happened to sit on the throne when rot had already begun. That question, to this day, has no final answer, and the legacy that remained was perhaps the collective psychological scar. The people of Rome learned that civilization was not immortal. A spoiled child placed on the throne could turn an empire into a circus. From then on, an instinct for vigilance lingered in the minds of generations. You can imagine parents telling their children stories not to lull them to sleep, but to warn them. Never allow another Commodus to rise. Do you sense the heavy air hanging, tinged with irony? For Commodus wanted immortality through bronze statues and divine titles, but what endured was an eternal curse in memory. Commodus, the mad emperor who turned Rome into a stage. And that echo haunted not only Rome, but carried into our own time, as a reminder that when absolute power falls into the hands of the unhinged, history will replay its drama, and the audience the people will pay with their civilization. Now close your eyes, relax your shoulders, and let me take you further into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, where the memory of Commodus was no longer just Rome's tale, but a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal fear of power. When medieval monks leafed through old manuscripts, they saw Commodus differently. To them, he was not simply a failed emperor, but proof that God had punished a pagan empire through its corruption. In church sermons, the image of a false god-king desecrating rituals, defiling the sacred, and dying shamefully in a bath resounded like a moral parable. For the faithful, the story was a vivid lesson. Whoever defies the divine order will be struck down in disgrace. You see, even centuries after his death, Commodus was still displayed as a case study in medieval morality. By the Renaissance, the mood had shifted again. People turned once more to Roman history, seeking light from the past to guide the present, and they did not forget Commodus. But now, instead of using him only as a tool of preaching, they examined him as the archetype of the tyrant set against their ideals of the virtuous prince. Renaissance scholars wrote of him with stern pens, calling him the anti-prince, the very opposite of the ruler they longed for. If Marcus Aurelius was the philosopher-king, Commodus was the squanderer, turning power into ridicule. And you can picture it. In intellectual gatherings of Florence or Venice, the story of Commodus retold with sighs. This is what happens when the throne falls into the hands of a pampered child. A little-known detail. In some Renaissance illustrations, Commodus was painted in the costume of Hercules, but with a distorted face, mocking his divine delusions. This shows that memory of him lived not only in history books, but seeped into art, becoming a symbol of absurdity. And of course, modern historians still argue. Some say the legacy of Commodus was exaggerated by senators who hated him, and so the records left behind are unfair, but many others counter. The archaeological evidence from coins and inscriptions to architecture matches the ancient accounts, which means that even if there was some exaggeration, the core of the story holds true. An emperor who turned Rome into a stage for his personal illusions. Do you hear the echo of time? From century to century, whenever society needed a reminder of the dangers of absolute power, Commodus was summoned back into the tale. For the Middle Ages, he was proof of God's punishment. For the Renaissance, he was the anti-model used to define the virtues of a true prince. For the modern age, he is the living example of the phrase, "Absolute power corrupts absolutely." Think about it, if Commodus lived today, he would likely be a media star, live streaming every night in a Hercules costume, forcing millions to hit like and share. But just as before, sooner or later the audience would realize they were watching a ridiculous play, and sarcastic laughter would replace forced applause. That, in truth, is his deepest legacy. The reminder that every illusion of power, no matter how dazzling, ultimately collapses before reality. Take a deep breath. Feel the hum of the fan brushing against you. And let me guide you into how modern scholars now see Commodus not only as a delusional king, but as a case study, exposing the fragile weaknesses of human nature when power goes unchecked. Today, economic historians frown when they review his reign. They see denarii debased, their silver content reduced. This is undeniable evidence that Commodus overspent, drained the treasury, and tried to fix the hole by tampering with the currency. The result? Inflation. People traded with coins that were worth so little they returned to barter. One scholar even joked that Commodus was the father of the economic bubble, except instead of inflating company stock, he inflated his own ego. Does that sound familiar? Today too, there are those who print more money or create financial illusions, and everyone knows how that ends. Meanwhile, modern psychologists dissect his personality like a clinical file. They analyze his erratic behavior, sometimes generous and playful, sometimes brutally violent. His conviction that he was Hercules reborn, his delight in humiliating others, his obsession with his own image. Many hypotheses emerge. From narcissistic personality disorder to antisocial disorder to the effects of lead poisoning from Roman pipes and food laced with heavy metals. One scholar even joked that if Commodus lived today, his medical record would fill a library. And not just medicine or economics. Sociologists also weigh in. They view Commodus as the symbol of a power overload society. When everything is concentrated in one individual, without checks or balances, that person easily spirals, dragging the entire system down with him. Romans once believed their system was strong enough to endure, but Commodus proved the opposite. You see, the question, how do you stop a madman from ruling, was not only Rome's question, it echoes all the way to our own time. A strange, often overlooked detail. Among fragments of graffiti found at Pompeii, the city buried in 79 but later partly resettled, there is a mocking phrase, Commodus Hercules, the slayer of lame beasts. This shows that ordinary Romans knew well that his victories were staged. How fascinating to realize that even in a repressed society, sarcasm still crept onto the walls. Historians continue to debate. Was Commodus truly the turning point that sent Rome spiraling downward, or just a discordant note in history's long symphony? Some argue he unlocked the chain of soldier emperors and the chaos of the 3rd century. Others are softer, claiming he was only a symptom, not the cause. But either way, his image stands out as a warning. One flawed individual can bring down a system that seemed unshakable. Do you feel it? The whispers from the past still echo, from the dim cloisters where medieval scholars saw him as divine punishment, to Renaissance salons where he was invoked as the archetype of a tyrant, and now to university lecture halls where students debate his disordered psyche. Though centuries have passed, Commodus lingers not as the immortal god he dreamed of, but as a collective nightmare from which humanity takes its lessons. And you, sitting here in the night, may sense the sweet irony. Commodus longed to leave an immortal mark. In the end, He succeeded, but in the very way he would have hated most. He is remembered not for triumphs, but for madness, not for great works, but for grotesque performances. And perhaps, if you have ever wished for immortality in memory, this story reminds you. Infamy is a path to eternity too, but not one anyone truly desires. Take a deep breath, hear the steady hum of the fan, and let me go on slowly, as though you are lying down, listening to an ancient song drifting into sleep. Commodus died, yet his shadow stretched longer than the stone-paved road leading to the Colosseum. People thought that killing this mad emperor would revive Rome, but Rome by then was like a body poisoned for too long. Even after the patient was gone, the wound still festered, and the legacy Commodus left was like a curse stretched across centuries. On the day after his death, the Senate erupted in fury. Imagine the men in white togas, faces flushed, hands trembling but eyes blazing after years of restraint. They shouted that Commodus was hostis publicus, enemy of the people, a title once reserved for traitors. Busts of Commodus in the form of Hercules were toppled, inscriptions of his name gouged out. Even the months he had renamed Commodus the Great, or Commodus Invincible, were restored to tradition. The entire city of Rome seemed to take part in a collective cleansing, erasing the traces of a man they now regarded as a disgrace. But tearing down statues is easy, mending the cracks in society is hard. And only a few months later, Rome fell into what history calls the Year of the Five Emperors. In just 1 year, the throne changed hands 5 times. One claimant backed by northern legions, another by the Praetorians, each toppled almost as soon as he rose. At one point, the throne itself was literally auctioned off to the highest bidder. Imagine it as an online bidding war today, except the item for sale was the entire Roman Empire. From that moment, the throne once wrapped in the sacred aura of Augustus lost its holiness. No longer did people see the emperor as father of the nation, but merely as a chair of power to be seized. The second legacy Commodus left was the corruption of the army. Once, Roman legions served the state with discipline and pride. But when soldiers saw their emperor dressing in lion skins to fight crippled beasts, when they watched high command sold to the wealthy instead of the capable, their trust evaporated. They became loyal only to the general who paid their wages and shared spoils. And when personal loyalty outweighed loyalty to the state, Rome spiraled into civil war. Do you hear the battle trumpet? It no longer rings clear and firm, but warped and broken, just like the army's lost rhythm. The third legacy, the shaking of religious faith. Commodus turned temples into stages and rituals into farce, leaving people adrift. So they sought other places for hope. Mystery cults like Mithras flourished, especially among soldiers. Christianity, though still outlawed, spread quietly, promising a justice beyond the reach of mad emperors. Modern scholars still debate, did Commodus unintentionally accelerate the spread of Christianity, or was he just one factor in an inevitable trend? Either way, the spiritual emptiness he left clearly drove people to new paths. And the fourth legacy, perhaps the most painful, collective trauma. Roman families once proud of their children now hid them, even making them appear ugly to avoid notice. Senators once proud in the Curia now trembled when summoned to the palace. Praetorians, once elite, now carried shame and resentment after being forced into farce. That society learned a carved-in-stone lesson. Civilization is not an immortal shield. It is fragile, and all it takes is one man with too much power and too little conscience to break it. In the Middle Ages, Commodus was recalled in sermons as proof that God punished Rome for its paganism. Priests told of him as a bad example to terrify the faithful. Look, the man who dared call himself a god died in disgrace. In the Renaissance, scholars recast him as the archetype of the tyrannus, the tyrant contrasted with the ideal of the merciful prince. Some paintings even showed him in Hercules' costume, but with a distorted face, immortal satire on his delusion. You see, even art itself used him as a mirror for absurdity. And today, historians, economists, psychologists, and sociologists still dissect Commodus as a case study of humanity. They note his debased coins, collapsing trade, and a military stripped of discipline. They analyze his psyche, narcissistic disorder, delusions, obsession with image, perhaps worsened by lead poisoning from Roman pipes. One scholar even joked, if Commodus lived in the modern age, his psychiatric record would fill an entire library. And sociologists conclude, he proved that no matter how strong a system seems, without mechanisms to check power, it can all be undone by just one man. An intriguing detail is that on some surviving ancient walls, graffiti mocking Commodus has been found. Commodus Hercules, slayer of lame beasts. The common people knew the truth. They were not deceived. They simply dared not speak aloud. Even in an age of repression, sarcasm slipped through in rough scratches on stone. And that too is his legacy. The collective memory of an emperor both feared and despised. So then, the legacy of Commodus is not grand monuments nor glorious victories. What remains is broken trust, a throne stripped of sanctity, an army robbed of discipline, a religion mocked, and a warning to humanity. He longed to be immortal in fame, but in the end achieved immortality in infamy. And strangely, that is what ensures he is remembered forever. Do you hear the whisper of history? It echoes from the Roman arena, through the pulpits of the Middle Ages, across Renaissance salons, and into modern lecture halls. All voices share the same refrain. Absolute power, when placed in the hands of the unhinged, turns civilization into farce. That is the lesson Commodus left behind, a lesson that never grows old. And you, as you lie listening tonight, may smile faintly. At least, amid the madness, we are left with a story told like a bedtime song, a lullaby reminding us that civilization, fragile as a thread, must be guarded with vigilance and conscience. You lie still, the fan humming like a steady rhythm, and I guide you further into the final layer of Commodus's legacy, his survival in cultural memory, not only in ancient Rome, not only in medieval manuscripts or Renaissance treatises, but even today, 2,000 years later. If you have watched Hollywood films, you will remember Gladiator, the Oscar-winning epic. The young emperor in gleaming armor, eyes dreamy yet soul distorted, is none other than Commodus reborn for the screen. The movie does not follow history exactly, of course, but you see how his image still haunts the modern audience. An emperor who made the arena his playground, a man hungry for love yet sowing fear. Even now, the name Commodus immediately conjures visions of corruption and warped power. In literature, he is often set against Marcus Aurelius. The father wrote the Meditations to teach humanity calmness and virtue, while the son wrote history with bloody farce. This contrast became a favorite theme for generations of scholars. How could a great philosopher father a mad tyrant? The question has no final answer. Some blame heredity, some the indulgence of palace life, and some call it a timeless tragedy. No matter how great the parent, fate of the child cannot be controlled. A little-known detail. In medieval manuscripts, Commodus was sometimes compared to the Antichrist. Not because he opposed Christianity, still far from mainstream then, but because he turned Roman faith itself into something that betrayed every value. Imagine that. An emperor remembered as the Antichrist, chilling and ironic, since he had so desperately wished to be worshipped as an immortal god. Today, psychotherapists sometimes use Commodus as a case study in their lectures. This is what happens when unlimited power morphs into delusions of omnipotence. Some philosophy professors cite him to remind students that civilization is never a guaranteed achievement. It is as fragile as a glass cup, and if it falls into clumsy hands, it shatters. You see, Commodus is no longer just a man. He has become a living metaphor. Historians still argue endlessly. Does he truly deserve a place among the worst emperors? Or have we judged him too harshly through the bias of the senatorial elite? Some scholars even try to rehabilitate him, suggesting he may have been a lonely young man, desperate for love, but finding only cruelty. Yet the evidence from coins, monuments, and even mocking graffiti insists steadily, no, Commodus really did turn Rome into a farce. Do you hear the echoes from the Colosseum? The false cheers, the clash of sword on shield, the ragged breaths of those forced to play roles in the emperor's theatre. Those echoes have never fallen silent. They seeped into films, into paintings, into history lessons. They remind you that a single person, just one, can warp an entire civilization if power grows too great and conscience too small. And so, Commodus's legacy becomes a dark lullaby for all humanity. Never fall asleep in the glow of civilization's pride. Rome once thought itself untouchable, and yet a single mad ruler planted seeds of chaos. Perhaps the most frightening truth about Commodus is not his grotesque antics, but the fact that history can always repeat itself anywhere, anytime. Close your eyes, listen to the fan's steady hum like a distant drumbeat, and I will lead you deeper into the legacy of Commodus not only as an individual, but as half of a tragic pair. Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, father and son, light and shadow. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, once sat by the Danube fire, penning words of humility, self-mastery, and compassion in the Meditations. He left behind the image of the wise king, a man who understood that power was a burden, not a privilege. And yet, the one son who inherited his throne turned those very values into mockery. Commodus did not write philosophy. He wrote history with absurd performances. He did not ponder justice. He pondered how to rename the months to glorify himself. If Marcus posed the question, how can one live virtuously within power? Commodus posed the opposite. What happens when power annihilates virtue completely? Modern philosophers often use this father-son pair as a vivid illustration in the eternal debate. Is human nature shaped more by heredity or by environment? Marcus Aurelius provided his son with the best teachers, exposed him to the workings of the state from a young age. And yet the result was an emperor obsessed with Hercules and childish games in the arena. Does this not suggest there are realms where education cannot reach? A little-known detail. In some medieval manuscripts, writers even claimed that Commodus was the price paid for Marcus's philosophy. Their meaning was this: Marcus was so devoted to contemplating truth and virtue that he neglected the ordinary, fragile needs of his son, and nature rushed in to fill the void with a shadow. In philosophy, some later critics suggested that Marcus Aurelius, lost in the pursuit of lofty truth, forgot that within his own household a child needed the grounding discipline of real life. This, of course, is a harsh judgment, yet it reveals the obsession of later generations. How could such a wise father produce such a son? And scholars still argue to this day. Some claim Commodus is proof that hereditary succession can never guarantee leadership. Others insist he was simply an exceptional case, a man weighed down by mental illness, not a fair measure of Rome's entire system. But whatever the cause, the opposition between Marcus and Commodus has become a symbol of two poles: reason and madness, virtue and corruption, creation and destruction. Picture a modern philosophy class in Europe. The professor enters, projects two images on the screen. Marcus Aurelius, with silver beard and contemplative gaze, and Commodus, draped in a lion's skin, face flushed with arrogance. Then he asks the students, if civilization could choose, whom would you have rule? But if civilization cannot choose, and must endure both, what lesson do you learn from this contrast? The room falls silent. Only the tapping of a pen on the desk is heard. And that is the moment when Commodus still lives not as emperor, but as a philosophical lesson. You see, even in disgrace, Commodus achieved his wish for immortality. But it is a bitter immortality. He became a mirror for others to examine themselves, to question human nature, the fragility of civilization, and the burden of power. He wanted to be remembered as Hercules reborn, but posterity recalls him instead as proof of the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and free. And you, lying in the quiet night, may smile softly, understanding that even darkness has its value. It is the background against which light shines brighter. Without Commodus, perhaps Marcus Aurelius would not seem so great. Without collapse, none would grasp how fragile civilization truly island. So you and I have traveled a long path together from the gilded halls of the Roman palace, through the false cheers of the arena, across medieval sermons, Renaissance paintings, and into modern classrooms. Commodus, the self-proclaimed Hercules reborn, left no triumphs, no monuments of greatness. What he left was an inverted legacy. A throne stripped of sanctity, an army fractured, religion undermined, and an immortal warning about the fragility of civilization in the hands of one uncontrolled man. And so, he attained the immortality he craved, not in glory, but in infamy. in cautionary tales told again and again. Commodus, who wished to be remembered as divine, remains instead as a reminder that power demands discipline, virtue, and the vigilance of the whole community. Now, as the lights in your room grow dim and the fan hums its steady lullaby, let the story close as a whisper from history. Tonight, you may drift into sleep with ease, knowing that even the wildest plays of the past can be transformed into lessons for the present. Sleep well, with gentle and peaceful dreams, so that when you wake tomorrow, you carry with you a fragment of Roman wisdom and a smile at the thought that at least we do not live under a Commodus of our own.